Hey guys, tonight we are going to step delicately, nose first, into one of the most pungent corners of ancient Rome, the fish sauce factory. You find yourself blinking under the Mediterranean sun, surrounded by the sharp tang of brine and decay, wondering what life decisions led you here. The air is thick with the unmistakable aroma of fermenting fish guts, which is somehow both cloying and aggressively assertive. You try breathing through your mouth, but that just introduces the taste. You are here to experience a full shift at a Roman garum workshop, the empire's premier hotspot for salty, gooey, vaguely horrifying condiments. The job pays enough to keep a roof over your head and a few olives in your pouch. But let us be honest, this is not exactly a dream gig. The factory walls are sun-bleached and streaked with mysterious drips. A stray cat eyes you warily, probably wondering if you, too, will end up in the vat. It hits you almost immediately. You are not going to survive this shift. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, drop a comment below with your location and the time where you are right now. I always love seeing where and when you're listening. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your supervisor, a grizzled man with no discernible sense of smell left, tosses you a stained apron and grunts something in Latin that probably translates to "try not to faint." Around you, terracotta vats bubble faintly in the heat, filled with various layers of fish parts and salt. There are rows of amphorae stacked neatly against one wall, each hand painted with markings, some indicating quality, some probably just ancient passive-aggressive notes about inventory. You take your first few steps into the workspace and immediately step into something slippery. No one reacts. A teenager nearby scoops what might once have been a mackerel from a basket, casually gutting it with a speed and indifference that is both impressive and slightly alarming. There are flies. So many flies. They rise in dense clouds from the fermentation vats, hover around your ears, and settle on everything with relentless determination. A fellow worker hands you a wreath of rosemary to tie around your neck. "It helps," she says, with a shrug that suggests it really does not. As you look around, it becomes clear that this place is a miniature universe. People bustle with purpose, some hauling sacks of salt, others measuring liquid in clay jugs, a few just stirring the murky depths of the vats with long sticks. A distant chorus of seagulls cackles overhead, like tiny winged food critics who disapprove of your hygiene. Historians still argue whether most Roman garum was made in small family-run setups or in massive, industrial-scale factories like this one. What is certain is that these places were essential to Roman cuisine, not just a splash here or there. No, garum was used on nearly everything. Bread, vegetables, meat, even desserts occasionally. Think of it as ancient Rome's answer to soy sauce, with a dash of low tide. The factory sits near the coast, close to a bustling port. This is no accident. Roman fish sauce required fresh fish, particularly oily varieties like anchovies, mackerel, or sardines. You learn quickly that fresh does not mean pleasant. The fish arrive in basket, still twitching, tossed onto chopping blocks, where their guts are removed in record time and flung into waiting containers. And you, lucky you, are stationed right next to the offal bins. Your task? Not so much gutting as sorting. You separate intestines, livers, and occasional unidentifiable squishy bits, organizing them by texture. There is a system, apparently. You just do not understand it yet. Behind you, someone hums tunelessly as they shovel fish organs into a large clay vessel. The smell is assertive. It is not just bad. It is layered. There are notes of low tide rot, a high-pitched tang of ammonia, and something else, something vaguely cheesy. You try not to breathe too deeply, but you also try not to gag too loudly. Pride matters. Your supervisor passes again, gives you a nod. You're doing fine, he says, as if this moment, the precise arrangement of anchovy innards, is some kind of personal triumph. A local myth says that experienced garum makers could identify the sauce's readiness just by the sound of bubbles rising from the vat. You tilt your head and listen. Blurp, gloop. You hear something, mostly the sound of your will to live dissolving. But there is a strange camaraderie here. An older woman jokes that her husband left her, but the fish never will. Another worker makes a face and mimes, fainting into the vats, to a chorus of snorts. Humor here is dry, and often at the expense of personal dignity. It is surprisingly effective. You learn your first real factory rule. Do not let the salt run out. Salt is sacred. Salt preserves the fish, neutralizes bacteria, and kickstarts the fermentation process. Without enough salt, the whole batch turns from garum to garbage. They say Pliny the Elder once described the best garum as so exquisite that it can be diluted many times and still retain its flavor. You try to imagine that. Right now, everything tastes like despair. Yet, there is a rhythm to the work. Haul, dump, stir, salt, repeat. The hours pass. The sun shifts slightly in the sky. You become aware that your hands no longer feel like your own. They are crusted with fish oils and salt crystals, and a cut you did not even notice earlier now stings like betrayal. In the corner of the yard, a man sits with a wax tablet, keeping track of the days each vat has been fermenting. This is no sloppy guessing game. The process takes weeks, even months. The fish parts and salt must be layered just right, the ratio precise, the sun generous, but not too intense. Temperature matters. The breeze matters. Even the shape of the amphory, wide neck or narrow, matters. Some scholars believe that certain factories had specific recipes, protected like trade secrets, and every region had its own style. Spanish garum, North African garum, Neapolitan garum, each slightly different, each with its own fans. You start to realize that this is not just smelly chaos, it is cuisine, sort of. As you finish your shift, your first half shift, really, you drag yourself over to a communal fountain to rinse off. It does not help. The smell lingers. It is in your nose, your skin, your soul. And yet, as you sit under a bit of shade, watching the sun glint off the briny vats, you start to feel almost okay. Almost. Your second day begins before the sun even has the decency to rise. The streets are still quiet as you shuffle toward the factory, the faint stink of fish sauce already curling through the morning air like a premonition. You consider turning around and becoming, perhaps, a wandering poet or a basket weaver. But no, your supervisor spots you from down the road and waves with alarming enthusiasm. You are back at the Roman garum factory, and today, they have decided it is time for you to actually understand what this mysterious brown liquid is. Your first task is to help measure out a batch that is, according to the ledger, nearly ready. You walk over to one of the older vats, where the surface glistens like a dark, oily mirror. The smell hits you like déjà vu, and then keeps on hitting. It is somehow stronger than yesterday, layered with a sickly sweetness that suggests fermentation has truly done its thing. You stir it gently with a long wooden pole, as instructed. The contents are, surprise, still fishy, but now they have mellowed. If one can use such a word to describe something that smells like a tide pool got into a bar fight. Beneath the surface, the fish parts have largely broken down, leaving behind a thick, soupy brine that is somewhere between alarming and artisanal. Your supervisor explains, in patient fragments of Latin and increasingly animated hand gestures, that garum is not just one thing. There are grades, levels, entire taxonomies. The purest garum, what they call the floss or flower, is the golden liquid that rises to the top of the vat, like some sort of ghastly fish champagne. This is what the elite want. This is what they pay extra for. The rest? That is for the plebs, soldiers, and tavern stews. Historians still debate whether all Roman households used the same kind of garum, or if regional variations mattered more than class. Some records suggest that garum from Baetica in Spain was considered the finest. Others hint that the North African blends had a richer flavor, thanks to different salting techniques. You get to sample a drop, just one. Your supervisor raises a ladle reverently, drips a single amber droplet onto your tongue, and watches your face. It is not as bad as you expected. It is salty, yes, but also oddly savory. There is a deep umami punch, like soy sauce collided with anchovy paste and made peace with it. You raise your eyebrows, the supervisor chuckles, and claps you on the back hard enough to knock the rosemary wreath off your neck. Garum, it turns out, was not merely a condiment. It was a cornerstone of Roman flavor. They used it the way modern kitchens use salt and pepper combined. A few drops could transform a bland grain porridge or boiled cabbage into something approximating a meal. Even Apicius, the Roman cookbook legend, used it in nearly every recipe. Some dishes call for it so frequently, you wonder if Roman chefs had it in 4-drip format. And it was not just for food. Wealthier Romans used garum in beauty treatments, wound care, and even as a base for some cosmetics. You pass a younger worker, rubbing it into a nasty scrape on his arm. He grins and shrugs, as if to say, it burns, but so does character. Not all garum was made equal. That much is becoming clear. Your factory, mid-range, well organized, close to the port, produces something known as liquamen, which some scholars argue was a broader term encompassing both luxury garum and its humbler cousins. But others insist liquamen was a lower grade byproduct and that the two sauces coexisted as separate entities entirely. The debate is the kind of thing that keeps food historians up at night and has fueled more than one scholarly feud over the placement of a comma in a translated inscription. Still stirring the vat, you feel the stick bump against something solid. You fish it out. It is a mostly intact fish spine, gleaming white and weirdly beautiful. The bones are brittle, but it is a sign that the fermentation process is nearly done. Another few days, and this batch will be bottled and shipped. In the drying yard, amphorae are being cleaned and lined up. These clay vessels will carry the sauce across the empire, overland to Gaul, by ship to Alexandria, even up to Britain, where soldiers on the frontier crave a taste of home, or at least a taste of something they cannot get from boiled turnips. Nearby, a couple of workers are labeling amphorae with brushes dipped in black pigment. You recognize a few symbols: a fish, a sun, a crude drawing of what might be Poseidon giving a thumbs up. Branding, you suppose. The factory's seal includes a dolphin, which, you are assured, is purely symbolic, though some ancient recipes do mention dolphin-based products. There is no clear evidence that your factory is in the dolphin business. You are relieved. Marginally, a shipment is being prepared for a wealthy merchant in Rome. His order includes 6 amphorae of top-grade floss garum to be served at an upcoming banquet celebrating Saturnalia. Rumor has it he will serve oysters, each individually drizzled with the sauce and crowned with a single pomegranate seed. You wonder if it will still taste like the back of a fishing boat. Probably. As the sun reaches its midday peak, the factory enters a sort of lull. Workers retreat to shady corners to chew on dried figs and flatbread. You sit on a low wall, wiping your forehead with a cloth that used to be white. In the distance, you can see the glint of the sea, and for a moment, the breeze carries something other than fish funk. Just for a moment, your fingers still smell. Your tunic is permanently stained, and yet, as a sense of purpose begins to form, however salty, however slimy, you realize that garum is not just gross, or weird, or ancient. It is genius, ingenious even, a way for Rome to preserve protein, stretch resources, and flavor food across vast distances. A pigeon lands near your foot. You watch it warily, knowing it has almost certainly tasted this sauce at some point. Maybe it prefers the Spanish variety. Back in the vat yard, your supervisor calls you over again. This time, you are learning how to skim the oil-rich layer from the top of the vats. Delicate work, done with wide, flat ladles and an unnerving level of patience. You mess it up twice. The third time, you get it right. He nods approvingly. You smile briefly. The sun continues its slow arc across the sky, and the factory resumes its rhythm. Rub, stir, salt, sort. Just another day in the world's smelliest kitchen. By now, you have surrendered to the smell. It has settled into your pores like a permanent house guest. And oddly enough, you are no longer constantly gagging. You have moved past resistance and into the dull-eyed acceptance of someone who knows that their tunic will never be truly clean again. Your supervisor has a new task for you. Today, you will assist in the preparation of the fish. Yes, the actual fish. Whole, slimy, slippery creatures still twitching slightly in the woven baskets where they lie, fresh from the nets. You thought the fermentation vats were bad. You were wrong. The fish prep yard is open to the elements, and you are greeted by a choir of gulls screaming overhead like critics who never sleep. Workers move quickly, tossing fish from baskets to tables, sorting them by size, type, and, apparently, personality. The smaller fish, anchovies, sardines, will go straight into the vats, unceremoniously layered between bricks of sea salt. The larger ones are gutted first, though there are rumors that some factories skip this step to enhance the flavor. Historians still argue whether the intestines were always removed or only sometimes. Some believe the enzymes in the viscera actually accelerated the fermentation process, especially for high-end garum. Others think leaving guts in was just a sign of laziness or cheapness. Either way, your factory is a bit more fastidious than most, and today you are on gutting duty. You are handed a blunt knife and pointed toward a table where a mountain of mackerel awaits your gentle touch. Your first attempt is clumsy, resulting in more fish on your tunic than in the bucket. But eventually, you find a rhythm: slice, scoop, toss. Slice, scoop, toss. It is almost meditative if you ignore the smell and the flies and the fact that a fisheye is now stuck to your sandal. Your partner at the table is a wiry teenager who introduces himself as Gaius, though he prefers to be called Mackerel. You do not ask why. He tells you about the factory gossip who got caught sneaking amphory to sell on the side, which foreman has a secret stash of cinnamon under his cot, and which former worker allegedly ran away to become a mime in Ostia. You believe all of it. The factory, despite its many odors, runs on stories. Nearby, another worker is layering fish into a fresh vat. The technique is precise. A layer of salt, a layer of fish, more salt, more fish, repeat, like the world's least appetizing lasagna. The goal is to create a perfect brine environment where the fish can gently break down without rotting completely. This is where the magic, or the madness, happens. You notice the salt is not the kind you sprinkle on fries. These are coarse, jagged crystals hauled in from coastal flats. Roman salt, especially from places like Ostia or Carthago Nova, was a precious resource. It preserved meat, flavored porridge, and kept fish sauce from becoming a biological hazard. Some say salt was so vital that soldiers were occasionally paid in it, a salarium. Yes, that is where salary comes from. You wonder if your payment will be similarly salty. There is a moment of quiet. Gaius stops gutting, stares at a fish, and says, "Do you think the emperor eats this?" You glance at the slurry oozing across your table and think about Emperor Tiberius nibbling pickled dormice between sips of Falernian wine. Maybe. Maybe not, but someone in his palace kitchen is using this same sauce, stirred into stews or spread on crusty bread with a bit of olive oil and vinegar. As you rinse your hands pointlessly in a trough of grayish water, you spot a small inscription carved into the stone wall nearby. Felix Laborat. Felix works here. You assume it is not a motivational slogan. Still, you whisper it to yourself like a prayer and continue. During your brief lunch break, you are given a small meal: barley bread, olives, and a stew that, yes, includes a dash of garum. It is not bad. Either your standards have plummeted, or your palate has truly adjusted. The stew is savory, the bread freshish, and the olives distractingly briny. You eat slowly, savoring the breeze that rolls in from the sea and temporarily masks the scent of fishy decay. One worker passes you with a basket of odd herbs: lovage, coriander, and rue. These, it turns out, are sometimes tossed into the vats for flavor enhancement. Not all factories do this, and some scholars think it was more of a regional quirk than a common practice. Others believe it was a way to mask the taste of inferior product. Either way, it smells slightly better than usual, and you start to fantasize about creating your own artisanal garum blend. Maybe with rosemary, maybe with ambition. The heat intensifies. You are sweating through your tunic, and your sandals squelch unpleasantly with each step. There is no escape. Every surface is tacky. Every breath tastes faintly like low tide. Yet somehow, amidst the sensory overload, your mind begins to wander. You imagine the people across the empire who will one day eat this sauce. Traders in Alexandria, legionnaires in Gaul, toga-clad partygoers in Pompeii, all sharing a culinary thread that runs straight through this yard, this vat, this mackerel. As you return to gutting, the foreman barks an order, and two workers begin sealing an amphora. They mix pine resin with wax to coat the inside, ensuring that the garum does not corrode the clay too quickly. Then they stamp the vessel with the factory's mark, a fish flanked by waves, with a faded Latin motto beneath it. You ask what it says. Gaius grins. It means we stink, but we are rich. Whether that is true or not, you cannot say. But the scale of production here is impressive. Amphorae are packed with damp straw, loaded onto wagons, and trundled off toward the docks. It is a relentless cycle, timed with the tides and the whims of merchants. You are merely one pair of slick hands in a long chain of labor stretching across the empire. The day begins to wind down. A crier rings a bell, signaling the end of your shift, and the workers groan in a chorus of aching limbs and salt-stung fingers. You stumble back toward your lodgings, trailing the smell like a proud badge or a court-ordered punishment. You fall onto your straw mat, too tired to peel off your sandals. The city hums outside. Somewhere, a street vendor is shouting about honey cakes. Somewhere else, a dog is barking at the moon. But in your mind, it is still just fish and salt, and maybe, if you are honest, a strange sort of pride. Morning again. The sky over the coast is pinkish gray, and the gulls have resumed their morning opinions. You wake up with salt in your hair and something that might be a scale glued to your cheek. The city stirs slowly, but the factory is already alive with motion. Steam rising from the vats, shouting echoing off stone walls, and someone banging a lid like they are auditioning for a very aggressive play. Today, you are assigned to the storage yard, where amphorae are being sorted, sealed, and labeled. You are told this is a prestigious task, but the foreman says that with the exact same tone one might use for digging latrines. The yard is a maze of ceramic jars, each one large enough to hold a child or a modestly ambitious dog. You weave between them, careful not to bump anything. These amphorae are precious, and if you break one, it comes out of your wages. All of them. A supervisor hands you a stylus and a small wooden tablet. Your job is to record markings on the jars, where the sauce was made, the type of fish used, the salt ratio, and sometimes which noble household is bound for. Some of the names are familiar: Seneca, Agrippina, Pliny. You blink. You had not realized that your sweaty labor might be gracing the tables of the Roman elite. Suddenly, your fingernails feel very unworthy. Historians still debate how centralized this labeling process really was. Some believe every factory had its own cryptic system, like ancient QR codes. Others think labeling was handled at the ports by traders who just made it up as they went along. Judging by the symbols scratched into one nearby jar, a stick figure riding a fish, you suspect some workers had fun with it. Your job is slow, methodical. You check the stamps, usually a simple brand, like VLP-GAR for Valerius lupus garum, then cross-check with the ledger and scratch a new line into your board. The wood is worn soft, and the stylus squeaks a little as you write. You find the sound comforting, almost soothing. The amphorae hum around you, warming in the sun, their contents quietly becoming delicious or dangerous, depending on time and luck. A veteran worker named Livia limps past you with a crate of sealing wax. She has been doing this for 20 years, and her left knee clicks audibly whenever she bends it. She tells you which customers are picky. One senator insists on sauce, made only with summer anchovies. Another demands a dash of fig vinegar in every barrel. There is a rumor that Cleopatra once requested Egyptian-style garum made with Nile perch, but Livia snorts at that. Too many bones, she says, and disappears around a stack of jars. Near midday, a dispute erupts. Two workers are arguing over a mislabeled amphora. One claims it was packed with salted tuna. The other swears it was sprats. Neither will back down, and a small crowd gathers to enjoy the show. Eventually, the foreman settles it by opening the jar and dipping a stick into the sauce for a taste. He swishes, swallows, and pronounces, "Definitely sprats." You try not to gag as he licks his fingers clean. Lunch is a boiled grain mash with, you guessed it, another drizzle of garum. It is comforting in a salty, slightly fermented way. Someone hands you a slice of hard cheese, and for a moment, the combination makes you feel almost refined. Roman umami, you think, like a food critic in sandals. The afternoon heat turns the yard into a slow cooker. The clay of the amphory radiates warmth, and the scent of aging fish hangs thick in the air, like a wet curtain. You take small sips from a shared water jug, the contents vaguely warm and faintly metallic. Hydration is important. You remind yourself, even if it tastes like disappointment. A ship arrives at the nearby dock. Its sails low and creaking. You are told it is bound for Massilia, modern-day Marseille, and is taking on a cargo of extra strong garum. This batch is so pungent it must be stored in double-sealed jars, which are lined with pine resin, goat fat, and a prayer to Neptune. You watch as workers roll the jars down wooden ramps, patting them with straw. One jar wobbles precariously, and you hold your breath. It steadies. The crowd exhales. You take a moment to admire the sheer scale of the operation. Hundreds of jars, dozens of workers, each one part of a carefully tuned, if very fishy, orchestra. And you, somehow, are now one of them. You are a cog in the salty, fermented machine that keeps Roman cuisine deliciously strange. Toward the end of your shift, you are asked to help load a donkey cart with a special delivery. These jars are bound for a local tavern known for its famous lentil stew. As you hoist the amphory onto the cart, you can hear laughter and music drifting from the building next door. It smells faintly of cinnamon and roasted chickpeas. A man walks past, biting into a crusty bread roll stuffed with cheese and herbs. You make a mental note to eat there once your nose has fully recovered from your new profession. You walk back to your bunk as twilight settles over the port. The sea reflects the last orange streaks of light, and the air is thick with brine and wood smoke. Your tunic is sticky, your arms ache, and you have definitely developed a small blister on your thumb from the stylus. But something inside you is shifting. You are no longer just enduring the work. You are learning the rhythms, the way each task flows into the next, how the jars are sorted like notes on a scroll, the way even a smell can signal what part of the process you are witnessing. You feel, in some faint and weary way, like a craftsman. As you collapse into your straw mat, the chorus of gulls seems a little softer tonight. Or maybe you are just too tired to care. The third morning begins before your eyes even open. A nearby clang startles you upright, and your first conscious breath is mostly composed of salt, smoke, and something you are pretty sure is pickled herring. You blink against the pre-dawn haze and drag yourself toward the main courtyard, rubbing the sleep from your eyes with fish-stained fingers. Today, you are told, is fermentation check day. You do not entirely know what that means until you are handed a long ladle, a ceramic mug, and a cloth to tie over your mouth. Apparently, some of the garum batches need to be tested to see if they have aged just right or gone completely rogue. Welcome to quality control, Roman style. Your new mentor is a man named Spurius, which feels appropriate. He is short, round, and perpetually cheerful in a way that makes you immediately suspicious. He carries a small wax tablet on which he tallies acceptable and disastrous samples with a stylus chewed almost to the nub. You trail behind him as he stops at each fermentation vat, lifts the lid with a theatrical grunt, and leans in like a wine sommelier preparing to describe a vintage. His nose twitches. Ah, notes of brine, anchovy, and yes, late summer mackerel. You peer in. The surface bubbles slowly, a glossy swirl of oil and fish paste. It looks like what happens when soup gives up. Spurious hands you the ladle. You hesitate. Go on. Dip, swirl, sniff. If you gag, it is bad. If you merely flinch, probably fine. You dip, swirl, sniff, you flinch. Spurious nods approvingly and marks the tablet with a chirpy. Historians still argue whether Roman garum truly reached a universal standard, or if good enough was the general philosophy. Some surviving recipes suggest strict control over ingredients and timing, while others read more like vague family folklore, with instructions like leave under the sun until it smells rich, but not dangerous. The latter seems closer to what you are living. At the next vat, Spurious does not even bother sniffing. He leans close, hears a faint hiss, and slams the lid back down. That one bit a guy last week. Skip. Not all garum is created equal. Some batches are prized for their clarity and gentle saltiness. Others, known as alec, are the gritty leftovers, cheap, hearty, used mostly by the working class. Today, you are testing both. The alec vats are less dramatic, but much more pungent. One gives off a smell that reminds you of wet socks, mushrooms, and a hint of caramel. You decide that is probably not the intended bouquet. Spurious laughs as you gag behind your cloth. You get used to it. Then you stop noticing anything at all. It is like marriage. You smile weakly and make a mental note never to propose. Mid-morning, a young apprentice faints into a vat of sardine-based sauce. He is fine, but the batch is declared tainted and must be disposed of. By disposed of, they mean dumped into the trench behind the warehouse, where gulls already circle like furry little vultures. You are grateful not to be on trench duty today. There is a break for watered wine and flatbread. You sit on a crate, legs dangling, and stare out at the sea. A dolphin breaks the surface briefly, then disappears. The breeze cuts through the stink for just a moment, and you wonder if you might be able to smell normally again by Saturnalia. Back to work. Spurious explains the 4 stages of fermentation, which sounds suspiciously like the 4 stages of grief. Denial this vat is probably fine. Anger, why is it hissing? Bargaining maybe if we stir it. And acceptance, yes. This is spoiled. Let us move on. You listen carefully, trying to memorize the subtle cues. Too many bubbles means gas buildup. A layer of white foam might be mold. And if the sauce changes color twice in a day, it is likely plotting something. A fringe theory among culinary historians claims that some garum was actually scented with herbs to mask flaws. Things like bay leaf, fennel, or even lavender. Spurious scoffs at this idea. Lavender? In fish sauce? Please. You would be exiled. As the sun climbs higher, you move to the small batch section. Experimental blends made for wealthy patrons with finicky tastes. One jar is labeled goatfish plus myrtle extract plus reduced salt. You open it and nearly fall backward. The smell is complex, not entirely bad, just confusing, like someone tried to invent ketchup with a head cold. Still, it passes spurious sniff test. Very trendy among senators. They think it is sophisticated. He leans in. Between you and me, it just smells expensive. Your last vat of the day is a monster. It sits under a wooden awning, kept cooler to preserve a prized batch meant for export to Alexandria. The label is branded directly into the wood. Optimum Garum, 6-month blend, mullet base. You remove the lid slowly, ceremonially. A soft steam rises. You lean in, and you are hit by the oddest thing. It smells nice, not great, not candle-worthy, but balanced. Salty, yes. Earthy, a bit of umami. You could almost imagine using it in a stew. Spurious beams. See? This is the real stuff. This is what made Pompeii rich. You seal it gently, mark it with a gold stamped tile, and help carry it toward the cold cellar. As you walk, you wonder what it would taste like on roast vegetables. Maybe even with a bit of barley. Maybe. You are starting to like this stuff? Back at your bunk, your knees buckle, and your arms go slack. You lie flat on the straw, arms outstretched, smelling faintly of anchovy and pride. You have survived fermentation day. Somewhere in the darkness, Spurious sings a song about fish in love. You smile. It is bottling day. You wake up to the sound of wooden stoppers being hammered into clay amphorae. The rhythmic thunk echoes across the yard like a particularly indecisive woodpecker. You sit up slowly, joints popping, and notice your tunic now has a permanent salt ring around the collar. Prestige. Today, you are assigned to the bottling and sealing crew, considered a promotion by some, a curse by others. You will spend the better part of the day hunched over massive vessels, pouring ladle after ladle of liquefied fish into narrower containers. The goal? Ship-ready amphorae, stoppered, sealed, and labeled for trade across the empire. You begin with the Optimum Garum, gold tier sauce destined for the elite markets of Rome, Carthage, and beyond. The big vats are tilted at a gentle angle using ropes and wooden braces, and you hold the smaller jar beneath the spout, careful not to spill a drop. Easier said than done when the viscosity is somewhere between broth and warm honey. You spill half of your first attempt on your sandals. The sauce glugs out in thick ribbons, brownish gold and glistening. It catches the sunlight like it is proud of itself. The smell is not even unpleasant today. Maybe your nose has finally broken. You finish the pour, wipe the lip clean with a cloth, and hand the amphora down the line. A worker pats a stopper in with a twist of cloth and wax. Another paints the destination in red pigment. Tarocco. Soothing. Repetitive work. This is where the factory feels less like a slaughterhouse and more like a factory floor of the modern kind. There is a strange rhythm to it all. Pour, pass, seal, label, repeat. In your periphery, the others move like gears, hands slick with brine, forearms dusted with dried salt, faces half lost behind cloth masks. You begin to zone out until you hear the whistle. It is not a bird or a person. It is the sound of pressure escaping. Someone has uncorked a vat prematurely, and the entire southern bottling crew is covered in a spray of half-fermented sardine sauce. It hits like a soggy sneeze. A man yelps. Someone slips. A crate of amphorae topples over like dominoes. Your supervisor, a woman named Procula, does not even flinch. She nods once, scribbles something on her wax tablet, and resumes bottling. Later, you learn that this is a known hazard. Sauce bloom, they call it. Very rare, very sticky. As you recover from the excitement, another worker named Juba offers you a boiled egg soaked in garum. It is surprisingly good. He grins. You have passed the test. You are one of us now. A mainstream historical fact. Garum was not just a condiment. It was a cornerstone of Roman cuisine, much like soy sauce in East Asia or Worcestershire in modern kitchens. It provided depth, salt, and umami. It was used on meat, fish, vegetables, even fruit. Roman cookbooks include garum in nearly everything short of dessert. Even there, debates rage. And speaking of debates, scholars still argue about how exactly the bottling and labeling process functioned at scale. Some believe the most prized garum was filtered several times before bottling, passed through linen cloth to achieve that coveted clarity. Others argue the rustic versions, cloudier and chunkier, were just as common, especially in rural provinces. You get to try filtering. A funnel made of woven reeds and cloth is placed over a wide jar. You pour slowly. The liquid drips through, leaving behind clumps of bone and scale. Your hands cramp from the slow, deliberate motion, but the result is rather pretty, a clear amber liquid, slightly shimmering. It would not look out of place in a perfume bottle. The amphorae themselves are each marked with symbols, some with fish, others with moons or stylized waves. Branding, you are told. Certain factories had reputations to uphold. Pompeii, even the now buried ones near Herculaneum. The best garum could command wild prices in Rome, especially among the gourmet set. There is one amphora in the corner, labeled with a tiny octopus holding a spoon. Nobody knows who came up with that logo, but everyone agrees it looks oddly smug. Your last task of the day is wax sealing. A bowl of red wax sits on a hot stone. You dip the amphora's neck, then press a wooden stamp into the soft surface. The stamp has a pine cone on it, apparently the local symbol of the factory. Yours is a little crooked. Nobody seems to mind. Nearby, an older worker chants a song about an amphora falling off a donkey and cracking all the way to Hispania. Everyone laughs, not because it is funny, but because it has been a long day, and you are all halfway loopy from fish fumes. A quirky tidbit: in some Roman cities, garum jars were recycled like milk bottles. People would return them to sellers, cleaned or not, and receive fresh sauce. A few rare inscriptions show tally marks, or the word again, scratched onto the clay. Ancient loyalty programs, in a way. The sun begins to dip. The amphorae are loaded onto carts bound for the docks. You help hoist a few, your back complaining with every bend. Each jar sloshes faintly, sealed and mysterious, like it contains ancient magic. You look down at your hands, salt-chapped, smudged with pigment, and still faintly glowing with that peculiar fish oil sheen. You smile. You have bottled liquid history. As you walk back to your bunk, the smell of garum no longer surprises you. In fact, you miss it when the wind shifts and brings only sea air. You have changed. A donkey brays somewhere in the distance. A faint splash echoes from the loading dock. Another day of fish sauce done. You wake the next morning to a sound that is somehow worse than fish sloshing. It is the unmistakable clank of bronze scales. Tax agents have arrived, a small procession of toga-clad men. Their sandals, far too clean for this place, are marching down the path toward the garum yard. One holds a stylus. Another carries a portable abacus. A third is writing in a wax tablet while sipping something from a tiny cup and looking faintly disgusted. They are here to perform an inspection, a regular affair, but still met with hushed muttering among the workers. You are instructed to assist with the tally. The logic? You are new, and therefore expendable if anything goes wrong. Comforting. You trail behind the officials as they begin their rounds. The first stop, the curing vats. They peer into each one with the air of someone inspecting fine wine, though you are fairly certain at least one of them gagged behind his toga. Measurements are taken. Salt ratios questioned. A fish scale is examined under the sun, as if it might reveal a secret message. A mainstream historical fact. Roman tax officials often monitored the production and export of luxury goods like garum, wine, and olive oil. This was both a revenue source and a method of quality control. Amphorae were taxed not only on contents, but sometimes by volume and distance traveled. Bureaucracy, you are learning, is eternal. You are sent running to fetch stamped amphorae for cross-reference. Each jar must match the factory's registered symbols and shipping codes. You locate 3 with pine cone seals and line them up. One of the officials, named, impressively, Gaius, asks you to open one. You hesitate, wondering whether being ordered to waste a whole amphora's worth of product might be a trap. Too late. The stopper comes loose, and a waft of that now familiar salty richness floods the area. Gaius dips a small spoon inside and tastes it. He nods, then sneezes, then writes a tiny check mark in his tablet. You breathe again. Next, they inspect the labor logs. A bound wax book records daily workers, hours spent, and what section each person covered. Your name misspelled as Euphosia, despite being neither Greek nor female, appears twice with vague notes like, standing around near vat. You decide not to clarify. A scholarly debate still circles around these ancient work records. Some historians believe laborers at garum factories were largely enslaved or indentured, with a few skilled artisans promoted to oversee operations. Others argue that seasonal workers and even volunteers were involved during busy months, especially near major ports. The truth likely varies from site to site. The tax agents mutter among themselves about labor inconsistencies. You watch 2 of them argue over the difference between garum and liquamen, gesturing at a vat as though it holds the answer. In truth, the terminology is muddy. Some sources use the words interchangeably, Others treat them as separate products, garum being the premium filtered liquid, liquamen the thicker leftovers. You are pretty sure this vat could pass for either depending on who is tasting. Eventually, they move on to inspect the salt storage. This is your chance to breathe. A quirky tidbit. Certain factories received their salt from imperial monopolies and were required to document exactly how much they used per batch. In one discovered tablet, a worker tried to fudge the numbers by claiming spillage due to gull attack. It did not work. The final ordeal is the bribe dance. One of your supervisors, an older man named Marcellinus, with a voice like dry rope, discreetly offers the inspectors a basket of figs and a small flask. The figs are overripe. The flask contains, you guessed it, the factory's finest garum. Gaius accepts the offerings with a frown that says, "This is beneath me," and a hand gesture that says, "Place it gently in my satchel." The inspection concludes. You are told to reseal the open amphora. No waste allowed. You pour the remaining garum back into a jar, carefully pat down the stopper, and re-dip it in wax. It feels a little like you have re-wrapped a birthday present for the second recipient. The tax agents disappeared down the road, their sandals still weirdly clean. You and the others slowly release the breath you did not realize you were holding. A kind of giddy, fish-scented relief washes over the yard. Someone opens a small jug of watered wine. Someone else starts humming the amphora song again, but now it has a verse about Gaius sneezing. By the afternoon, things are back to normal. You are asked to help inventory the tools. Tongs, ladles, reed filters, measuring cups made from hollowed gourd. Each one is logged and counted. A broken scale pan is mourned with surprising solemnity before being tossed into a scrap pile. You are beginning to understand that nothing is wasted here. Not product, not people, not even stories. You think back to the look on Gaius's face as he tasted the garum. He will go home tonight and tell someone about his ordeal. He will probably exaggerate. He might even say it was dreadful, but he finished the spoonful, and he gave it a check mark. Maybe it was not so bad. As the sun sets, you find yourself once again near the fermenting yard, watching the vats glow faintly in the golden light. You wonder where today's batch will end up. On an aristocrat's roast peacock? In the stew of a tavern in Gaul? Or splashed accidentally on a toga during a dinner party disaster? The smell clings to you like an old friend now. When the breeze picks up, you catch a trace of lavender from the hills, but beneath it, always, the sea and the sauce. You smile. The empire moves on garum, and today, you are part of that machine. You are not expecting a philosophy lecture when you arrive at work, but there he is, an older man with ink-stained fingers and a forehead creased by thought rather than sun. He is seated on a barrel, holding a scroll in one hand and a thin reed pen in the other. Everyone calls him Philologus, though you doubt that is his real name. The moment you step into the yard, he waves you over with the air of someone about to tell you why fish sauce holds the secrets of the cosmos. He is, apparently, the factory's part-time record keeper and full-time resident thinker. By some twist of fate or family favor, he was once trained in rhetoric, but now devotes himself to tracking garum yields and debating syllogisms with Amphory. "Ah," he says, peering at you as if you are a particularly puzzling papyrus. "You are the new one. Do you know how many philosophical questions are hidden in the brine?" You glance toward a vat. You are going to guess none. He begins anyway. "A fish gives its life. It is reduced to liquid. That liquid becomes profit, seasoning, sometimes even medicine. Is that degradation or elevation? Discuss." You wish someone had warned you about this, but you humor him. It is either that or sort more Amphory today. Philologus launches into a monologue about transmutation, comparing the slow fermentation of garum to stoic self-discipline. The fish must surrender to the salt, just as the soul must surrender to logos. It is oddly soothing. The bubbling of the brine becomes background music for this fishy sermon. A mainstream historical fact. Garum was not merely a condiment. Roman texts describe it as an ingredient in cosmetics, treatments for ulcers, and even as a base for cough syrups. Some varieties were marketed for their purity and medicinal value. Wealthier homes might even keep special Amphory labeled for different ailments: headache, digestion, melancholy. Philologus unrolls a scroll and points to a passage in Greek. You recognize the word garos. He explains that in ancient Greece, the term referred to a similar preparation made from fish intestines, but the Romans industrialized it, systematized it, and turned it into something the entire empire would crave. And yet, he says, not all sauces are created equal. He gestures toward the different jars. There is moria, the salty brine; liquamen, the thicker fluid; alec, the sediment paste. All parts of the process, all parts of the same truth. The soul, the body, the memory. A scholarly debate has circled for years around the exact classification of these substances. Were they always distinct products, or were the names regionally and temporally interchangeable? Some sources blur the lines entirely, referring to liquamen and garum as the same thing, while others insist on clear distinctions. Modern scholars remain divided, just like the sauces themselves. Philologus invites you to taste each one. You hesitate, but curiosity wins. He hands you a small wooden spoon and dips it into a jar marked alec. It is textured, more paste than liquid, salty, pungent, slightly nutty. The flavor lingers in a way that makes you want both wine and answers. Poor people used alec, Philologus explains. It was cheaper. Some even spread it on bread. You nod slowly, your mouth still processing. He gives you a sliver of salted cheese to cleanse your palate and moves on to the next. A golden-hued garum, filtered and rich. You try it. It is smoother, rounder, more expensive, no doubt. He watches your reaction with satisfaction. See? You understand now, do you? He leans back and tells you that the Emperor Tiberius once had a special garum prepared for his pet snake. An apocryphal story, he admits, but one he enjoys. Apparently, the snake only ate smoked dormice glazed in fish sauce. You try to picture the palace chef preparing reptile hors d'oeuvres and decide that nothing surprises you anymore. A quirky tidbit. Some Roman authors joke that a single drop of high-grade garum could flavor an entire pot of stew, whether out of respect for its potency or just frugality remains unclear. Pliny the Elder once wrote that certain garum batches were so prized they cost more per amphora than perfume. You suspect he never had to clean a vat. Philologus returns to his scroll. You assume the lecture is over, but then he asks, "Have you ever thought about death?" You sigh. "Of course it ends like this." He continues, "In garum, the dead nourish the living, not unlike compost, not unlike memory. Perhaps even the afterlife is just a well-fermented batch of recollections." You glance around at the bubbling brine, the chalky workers, the endless jars. It is a strange comfort, this idea that even the smelliest parts of life serve some greater cycle. Later, as you help filter a new batch of sauce, you find yourself thinking in metaphors. The reed strainers are like values, separating the noble essence from the dregs. The salt is adversity. The amphorae are the containers of self. It is either a spiritual epiphany or early onset fish delirium. As the sun lowers, Philologus wanders off with his scrolls, muttering about naming his next treatise De Natura Liquaminis. You do not know if he is joking. You resume your work beside the vats, ladling slowly, gently, with something like reverence. The sauce flows in quiet streams, warm and amber. You catch your reflection in the surface, warped by motion, but still there. And suddenly, you do not mind the smell quite so much. You begin the day with a new appreciation for the art of packaging. Amphorae are everywhere, stacked, sealed, labeled, and somehow these fragile clay vessels are the lifeblood of an empire's flavor. Your supervisor assigns you to the shipping section, where the day's batches are prepared for transport. Today's task is to check each amphora's seal and mark it with the factory's stamp, a pine cone surrounded by a ring of dots. This symbolizes the factory's origin and ensures authenticity. Counterfeiting garum, like any prized commodity, is a long-standing problem. You handle a jar marked Garum Sociorum, a brand you have heard of whispered among the workers. It is considered the best, the kind that might end up in the kitchens of senators, or even the emperor himself. A mainstream historical fact, Roman garum was a major export product, shipped across the Mediterranean and beyond. Archaeologists have found amphorae in places as far-flung as Britain and North Africa, bearing stamps that trace them back to specific factories. These marks help traders and consumers verify quality and origin, ancient branding at its finest. As you press the seal into the wet clay of a freshly made jar, you imagine the long journey ahead. The amphora will be loaded onto carts, then ships, and finally into the kitchens of grand villas. Somewhere, a wealthy Roman will drizzle this precious sauce over roasted dormice or boiled oysters. The rhythmic pressing of seals becomes oddly hypnotic. Nearby, a worker explains the amphora's secret. Its pointed base is designed to fit into racks on ships, allowing the jars to nestle closely and avoid breaking during storms. You marvel at this ancient logistics engineering. Even in its smelliness, garum is a masterpiece of design. A quirky tidbit. Some amphorae carried graffiti, little notes scratched into the clay by sailors or dock workers. One famous example reads, "Here lies the best garum, but don't spill it, or you'll wish you were fish." You wonder who had time to joke like that amid the stink and salt. The supervisor reminds you to check the wax seals. A broken or missing seal means the batch could have leaked or been tampered with. You imagine garum thieves, shadowy figures sneaking into warehouses to siphon off liquid gold. It sounds like the plot of a Roman crime novel. Historians still debate whether garum factories operated year-round or only seasonally. Some argue that peak production coincided with fish migrations, while others believe demand was steady enough to justify continuous work. The presence of massive amphora stockpiles suggests a complex supply chain that balanced production, storage, and shipment. You notice an amphora stamped not with the pine cone, but a curious symbol, two dolphins chasing a trident. The supervisor tells you this was a special batch produced for a seaside festival in Ostia. The idea that a jar of fish guts could be festive makes you chuckle quietly. Your fingers grow sticky as you dip the sealing wax into a small bowl of hot resin. The smell is sharp, cutting through the brine's heaviness. You quickly press the wax over the cork and imprint the pine cone again. Each jar sealed feels like a promise. As you finish the last amphora, a breeze carries the salty scent over the shipping yard. You watch a few dock workers heft a crate onto a wooden cart, then set off down the road toward the harbor. You imagine the garum traveling over calm seas, past olive groves and vineyards, eventually arriving on marble tables far from this factory's humble, smelly heart. The irony is not lost on you. You take a deep breath, letting the mixed aromas settle. The scent of salt, fish, resin, and earth mingles in the air like an ancient perfume, one that no modern cologne could ever hope to replicate. As the sun dips lower, you wipe your hands and prepare for the next shift. Somewhere in the empire, a Roman will raise a cup of wine and savor a drop of this sauce. And for a brief moment, the work you do here will taste like luxury. You smile, knowing the empire runs on fish, salt, and a little bit of magic. You shuffle into the early morning chill and find yourself near the outskirts of the factory where the fish are first delivered. This is the starting line of your garum journey, the moment when fresh fish meet salt and everything changes. Today, you watch the unloading of the day's catch. Heaps of small fish, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, all glistening, slippery, and pungent in the early light. Their silvery scales shimmer faintly despite the thick mist hanging low. You are handed a basket and instructed to sort the fish, separating the freshest from those less fit. This job sounds simple until the smell hits you. Sharp, briny, and unrelenting, like the sea itself had turned sour and settled into your nostrils. A mainstream historical fact, Roman garum factories were often located right on the coast, taking advantage of proximity to fresh fish and the natural salting process accelerated by sea breezes. This location was critical, as freshness greatly influenced the final product's quality. As you work, you notice the fish scales flaking off easily in your hands. You wonder if anyone back then thought about how these scales might have been useful. Some recent archaeological findings suggest fish scales were sometimes used in cosmetics, or even as a type of glitter, an early Roman sparkly trend, if you will. You chuckle softly, wiping your hands on your tunic, which is already stained with salt and brine. You realize that your clothes will never quite be the same after working here. A scholarly debate swirls quietly among experts about how the Romans managed waste at these factories. Some believe that leftover fish parts were discarded haphazardly, creating mounds of putrid scraps, while others argue that many scraps were recycled, perhaps as animal feed or fertilizer. The truth likely varies by region and time. You find yourself pondering the smell's endurance. The brine doesn't just coat your hands. It clings to your hair, your clothes, even your thoughts. You start to think the scent might become a part of you, a badge of honor or a curse. Nearby, an older worker hums an old tune, an oddly melodic contrast to the chaotic unloading. You wonder if this song has been sung by fish workers for generations, a sleepy lullaby to the smell. You watch as the baskets of fish are dumped into large stone vats, where salt is layered generously on top. The fish disappear under the thick salt, like ancient treasures buried in sand. The salt's role is crucial, of course. It acts as both preservative and fermenter, allowing the fish to slowly break down and release their flavors over weeks. You imagine the fish as silent alchemists, transforming their flesh into liquid gold. A quirky tidbit: some sources claim that certain garum factories used secret salt blends, adding herbs or even small amounts of vinegar to influence the flavor. These recipes were jealously guarded trade secrets, passed down like family heirlooms. As you finish sorting, you realize that this beginning, so messy, so smelly, is actually the most important step. Without fresh fish carefully layered with the right amount of salt, the entire process would fail. You wipe your brow and look out at the horizon. The sea breeze, while carrying the scent of decay, also brings a hint of salt air and the promise of something ancient and vital. You begin to understand that working in this factory means more than just enduring the smell. It means participating in a cycle of nature, commerce, and tradition. You take a deep breath, bracing yourself for the hours ahead, and wonder quietly how you will ever get used to this peculiar, pungent perfume. You find yourself deeper inside the factory, where the real alchemy of garum happens, the fermentation vats. These massive stone basins, some wider than your entire room, bubble quietly, releasing a faint hiss and a complex aroma that hovers somewhere between salty sea air and ancient socks. Here, the fish and salt have been layered for weeks, slowly breaking down into the rich, amber liquid the Romans prize. You can see tiny bubbles rising to the surface, evidence of the unseen microbial orchestra working tirelessly in the dark. A mainstream historical fact: the fermentation process for garum could take anywhere from several weeks to several months. The slow enzymatic breakdown of fish proteins creates amino acids, giving garum its signature umami flavor, long before the term umami existed, of course. As you edge closer to a vat, the supervisor warns you not to lean in too much. This stuff is potent. You get a whiff, and it's a sensory overload. The scent is so powerful it almost makes you dizzy. You decide the phrase, nose blind, is a survival skill here. Nearby, a fellow worker recounts a curious local belief that garum smell could ward off evil spirits and bad luck. While historians still argue the validity of this superstition, it adds an oddly comforting layer to the factory's otherwise pungent atmosphere. You watch as a seasoned worker skims the surface with a long wooden paddle, gathering the liquid gold into a small bucket. This liquid is then carefully filtered through cloth to separate the fine, flavorful garum from the thicker residue beneath. A quirky tidbit: some ancient recipes called for adding herbs like dill or coriander during fermentation, aiming to mellow the strong fishy notes. Others experimented with different fish species, each believed to impart a unique character to the sauce. There's even evidence that Romans sometimes added wine to enhance flavor complexity. The debate among scholars continues about whether the fermentation vats were communal or privately owned by families who then pooled their products. Some suggest a cooperative system existed, while others think fierce competition and secrecy dominated. You dip your finger tentatively into a vat and taste a small drop of garum. It is shockingly savory, with a rich, briny depth and a subtle sweetness beneath. The flavor seems to expand slowly on your tongue, like an ancient ocean in miniature. You think about the journey this sauce has taken, from raw fish to this concentrated elixir. The sensory experience is almost meditative. Your hands become slick as you help filter the garum, a job requiring both strength and delicacy. Any mistake could ruin the batch or cause contamination. The work is repetitive, almost hypnotic. You find yourself slipping into a rhythm, your movements syncing with the steady bubbling and distant cries of seabirds outside. You glance at the clock and realize hours have passed. The factory smells the same, yet somehow you feel less repelled. Perhaps this is what the workers mean by becoming one with the brine. Before the shift ends, you overhear a whispered debate about a rare garum batch made with dolphin fish. The very idea sounds extravagant, and you wonder whether such luxury was common or just a myth to inspire awe. As the sun sets, the vats glow faintly under the dim light, golden pools reflecting centuries of history. You feel a quiet pride in your work, despite the smell and the mess. And somewhere deep inside, you think you might actually be surviving this after all. You move next to the filtering and bottling area, where the thick, fragrant liquid is carefully separated from the solid residue. This stage demands your full attention, as even a small impurity could spoil the batch or diminish its prized flavor. The filtering process involves pouring the garum through layers of fine cloth, linen, or wool that act like ancient sieves, catching the tiny bits of undissolved fish while letting the rich, translucent sauce pass through. A mainstream historical fact: the Romans often used multiple filtering stages, sometimes pressing the residue a second or third time to extract a thicker, less refined sauce called alec. This byproduct was cheaper and more commonly consumed by the lower classes. As you steady the heavy clay jar, and pour the liquid into it. You notice the garum's amber color shimmering in the fading daylight. It almost looks like honey, but with a marine glow. The smell is strong but oddly comforting now, like an old friend you're learning to tolerate. A quirky tidbit. Some garum jars were designed with spouts or narrow necks, making pouring easier and less messy. Imagine an ancient version of a squeeze bottle, but way less convenient and way smellier. You hear a colleague joke that the factory's amphora design team probably never won any innovation awards. Still, the jars get the job done, holding liquid that in many ways shaped the empire's taste buds. Historians still argue whether garum was mainly a kitchen staple or more of a luxury condiment reserved for special occasions. The truth seems to lie somewhere in between, with quality and price varying widely. Your hands are sticky from the garum, and you lick a finger absent-mindedly, tasting the salty, savory complexity. You wonder how Roman cooks managed to resist sipping it straight from the jars. You start labeling each amphora with stamps indicating the factory's name and origin. The stamps also served as quality guarantees, much like modern brands, helping merchants and consumers identify trusted sources amid a sea of imitators. An amusing note comes from a worker who shares that some unscrupulous merchants once tried mixing garum with cheap vinegar to fool customers. Thankfully, the con was short-lived. No one could stand the taste. You chuckle softly, imagining the faces of those unfortunate buyers. The process of sealing the jars with wax is next, a task that requires both precision and care. One wrong move, and the precious sauce could spill or spoil before reaching its destination. You press the warm wax onto the cork, imprinting the factory's pinecone emblem once more. This ritual, repeated countless times, feels oddly satisfying. Each seal a tiny promise of flavor and history. As you work, you reflect on the strange intimacy of this job. Here you are, handling something made from rotting fish, yet it carries the tastes and smells of an entire culture. The garum's journey from vats to amphorae mirrors your own passage through this peculiar world. A slow transformation from outsider to participant. The sun sinks lower, and the factory begins to quiet. The day's work ends with a mixture of exhaustion and a strange pride in the sauce you have helped create. You breathe deeply, the briny scent wrapping around you like a cloak, a reminder that even the most humble beginnings can leave a lasting legacy. As evening falls, you wander toward the workers' quarters, where the day's stories and tired jokes float on the salty breeze. This is the rare chance to glimpse the human side of the garum factory, the faces behind the stench and sweat. You find a small group gathered around a fire, passing around scraps of bread and dried olives. The conversation drifts from fish prices to curious rumors about garum's uses beyond the dining table. A mainstream historical fact, garum was not only a condiment, but also believed to have medicinal properties. Ancient Roman physicians sometimes recommended it for digestion issues, wounds, and even as an aphrodisiac. This broad utility added to its value in Roman society. One worker shares a story about an old recipe involving garum and honey. used as a healing salve for minor cuts. You smile at the irony, a product born of decay turned into a cure. A quirky tidbit: some ancient texts suggest garum was even used in cosmetics, mixed with fragrant oils to create perfumes and skin treatments. The idea of slathering fish sauce on your face is both amusing and strangely believable in this world. As the group laughs softly, you notice the camaraderie born from shared toil. The factory's unpleasantness seems less daunting when surrounded by friends who understand the smell, the sweat, and the sticky work. A scholarly debate you overhear concerns whether garum was universally loved, or if some Romans found its aroma too overpowering. Some argue that the elite prized it, while others suggest it was a polarizing taste, much like certain modern foods. You listen as a worker jokes, "If you can smell garum all day, you can smell anything." The group chuckles, and you feel a sudden warmth, not just from the fire, but from belonging. You look around at the worn faces, the hands stained with salt and fish oils, and realize that these people carry a small piece of Roman history in their daily labor. The conversation shifts to festivals and feasts, where garum played a starring role. You learn that during some celebrations, special batches flavored with rare herbs were brought out, turning the pungent sauce into a centerpiece rather than a background note. You feel the gentle pull of fatigue and realize the day's work has woven you into this ancient fabric. The fire crackles as stories grow softer, voices lower. The salty air cools, and the night settles over the factory. You lie back, staring at the stars just beyond the factory walls, imagining the journeys garum will take across seas, through markets, onto plates you will never see. The shared labor, the smells, the sticky fingers, they all fade into a quiet memory, and you realize, perhaps surprisingly, that you have survived this strange, smelly world a little longer than you expected. The following morning, you begin the delicate task of quality control, tasting and testing each batch of garum before it leaves the factory gates. Your palate is becoming strangely attuned to the nuances, the slight sweetness from mackerel, the sharper notes of anchovies, and the subtle hint of seaweed carried in the salt. This step feels like the final act in a long ritual where every sense is engaged and the day's labor either finds approval or rejection. A mainstream historical fact: Roman garum merchants prized consistency and quality above all, often competing fiercely to maintain their secret recipes and reputations. The best garum fetched high prices, even in distant provinces, making quality control crucial. As you taste a fresh sample, you are reminded of an odd scholarly debate about whether garum was ever consumed raw or only after fermentation. While most agree on fermentation, some texts hint at different culinary uses, suggesting it might have also been a snack for the daring or desperate. You smile at the thought of ancient Romans sipping straight fish sauce like a modern energy drink. A quirky tidbit emerges as you inspect a batch rumored to have been made with garum infused with exotic spices like cinnamon or even pepper. Such flavors were considered luxurious and possibly reserved for imperial banquets, adding an unexpected complexity to this pungent sauce. As you work, You consider how much skill and patience the entire process requires, from catching and sorting fish to fermentation, filtering, bottling, and finally testing. It feels like being part of an ancient culinary orchestra. The factory's cacophony now seems like music to your ears. The bubbling vats, the scraping paddles, and the low murmur of workers sharing stories. You watch as the finished jars are packed carefully onto carts, destined for markets throughout the empire. The thought of garum traveling from your hands to distant lands brings a strange sense of accomplishment. Historians still debate how far Roman garum reached, with some arguing it was traded as far east as India and as far west as Britannia. The evidence is tantalizing but inconclusive. You imagine the exotic tables that will receive this sauce, the grand feasts, and humble kitchens alike, all connected by the same salty, ancient thread. A final joke bubbles up to your mind. If garum was the ketchup of the Roman world, then working here makes you part of the original fast food industry, only smellier and with fewer fries. As the day closes, you reflect on the unlikely journey you have undertaken, from wide-eyed newcomer to seasoned fish sauce craftsman. You feel a surprising affection for this strange craft and its ancient rhythms. You breathe deeply, savoring the last faint traces of brine on your skin. The sun dips low, and the factory slowly quiets. You think, just maybe, you could survive another shift. The final shift draws to a close, and the factory settles into a quiet lull. You move through the dimming light, your body tired, but your mind calm, attuned to the subtle symphony of sounds, the gentle drip of leftover brine, the distant calls of seabirds, and the soft rustle of wind through the salt-crusted windows. You reflect on how the day's work, once so daunting, has become a strange kind of meditation. The rhythms of chopping, layering, fermenting, and filtering blend seamlessly with your breathing, lulling you into a peaceful state. A mainstream historical fact: the garum factories were often located near coastal towns, taking advantage of fresh fish supplies and sea breezes that helped with preservation. The location was as much about practicality as it was about community. You recall the scholarly debate about whether workers lived permanently in factory towns or commuted from nearby villages. Evidence suggests a mix, with some factories operating almost like small villages themselves. The smell, once overwhelming, now seems like an old friend, familiar and oddly soothing, like the scent of a well-worn book or a cherished sweater. You think about the peculiar nature of garum, a product made from decay, but treasured across an empire. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind. Some Romans reportedly enjoyed drinking diluted garum as a restorative tonic. You can almost hear their gentle sighs of satisfaction, the same way you might enjoy a calming cup of tea. As night wraps the factory in shadows, you feel the weight of history settling on your shoulders, a warm, comfortable cloak. You close your eyes briefly, letting the memories of fish, salt, and slow fermentation wash over you like a gentle tide. The world outside hums softly, a lullaby of distant waves and whispering wind. And now, as your mind drifts gently toward rest, you realize that you have lived this strange, pungent day alongside ancient Romans, your senses enriched, your thoughts deepened, and your soul quietly soothed. Now, as the garum vats cool and the factory grows still, allow your breath to slow and your muscles to relax. Imagine the gentle ebb of ocean tides, the soft whisper of sea air mingling with faint memories of salted fish and sun-warmed stones. Let the peculiar scent fade into a distant echo, replaced by calm and comfort. Your body sinks deeper into rest, embraced by the quiet rhythm of the ancient world you have visited. The salty air, the slow fermentation, and the steady hands of workers long gone all blend into a serene backdrop, inviting you to drift softly toward sleep. No need to rush or resist. Just float on the gentle current of history's hush. Close your eyes and let this slow, sleepy story settle like a feather on your mind. Sweet dreams, until we meet again on another peaceful journey.